thing that's beginning to happen, and I'm not sure everybody understands this particular problem, is that right now ships are limited from coming from Europe, or excuse me, from Asia to the East Coast of the United States by the size of the Panama Canal. And in 2014, 2016, somewhere along in there, they're going to open a new lock in the Panama Canal. And in doing so, we're going to change the size of the ships that can come into local ports. Now, when they were building the Panama Canal, initially they thought that the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean were the same level. And all they had to do was dig a canal, and that would be real simple. Well, it wasn't long after they started doing that work, they began to realize, oh, wait a minute. The Atlantic is higher than the Pacific, and if I do this, it's all going to run one way. And so we put in a series of locks. And it's the size of those locks that limits the size of the ships. And what's going to happen is we're going to build a new set of locks. And the good news about the locks is that they're actually more water conservation because they're going to recycle the water through the locks. Right now it just flows through, which has led to another set of environmental problems, by the way. But when they build a new lock, what will happen is the ships, which currently can take about 42 feet of draft, will actually be able to take 50 feet of draft. Now, remember when I started talking, I said that we had dredged the St. Johns River from its original depth of 12 to 14 feet to 40 to 42 feet. Well, now we're talking about dredging it to 50 feet. So what you're doing is enlarging the diameter of the amount of water that can come into the St. Johns River. And that's going to have a dramatic change on the ecology of the St. Johns River. And that's a conversation that we as a community need to have, because I'm not so sure that we really understand the consequences of it. It's potentially a $700 billion job, sorry, $700 million job to dig to do the dredging. Probably another $700 million necessary to build the other infrastructure. And so you're sort of looking at a $1.2, $1.4 billion project. Is it really worth 30,000 jobs? Will we really actually get the economic benefit? And right now that's what the Army Corps of Engineers is looking at. And once they get that done, they say, oh yeah, it's worth it. Then we'll start looking at the environmental impact. And that's the conversation I think we as a community have got to have. Is it really worth it? The conventional wisdom is that we'll have 3 ports on the East Coast that will handle these post-Panamax ships. Post-Panamax mean the phrase we use for meaning the large Panama Canal. Well, that post-Panamax ship, they can already go into New York. That's a natural harbor well over 50 feet deep. They can already go into Norfolk, Virginia, which is also a somewhat natural harbor, but it's also deepened by the Department of Defense because of the concentration of Navy ships there. And so right now, the competition is between Miami, Jacksonville, Savannah, and Charleston. Those are the 4. And so Jacksonville is sort of battling in-state Miami, and out-of-state, we're actually battling South Carolina and Georgia. And then to sort of kick it up a notch, the state of Virginia doesn't want us to have nuclear carriers, so they're battling us too. So this is not a slam dunk. This is a very politically charged environment. And it's going to be interesting to watch what happens. So stay tuned and follow the press, because I think it's going to take people who understand what's going on to comment about this and to figure out what's happening. And this is the last piece I was going to mention about when this is the nuclear carrier at Mayport. We've got people here from Mayport Elementary and Mayport Middle School. And you know, I think a lot of us want to have the Navy presence. But with that ship comes a deepening of the port, because we've got to deepen the port in order to get the ship in and out. And I showed you earlier the map that showed we built Mayport Turning Basin. The good news about this particular project is that deepening that little bit of the port has very little impact upstream. And so this is sort of a positive thing we can do. But just sort of think back to how we have modified the environment to get there, part of that MAYHEM thing. So what's this done? Well, it's led to things like algae blooms and foam and fish kills, because we've done these things over the years, little by little by little, death by 1,000 cuts kind of thing. This is some samples we did with Fish and Wildlife at the MSRI, and this actually becomes the concentration point between the saltwater samples and the freshwater samples. This particular algae, which is a blue-green algae, doesn't tolerate salt at all. So there's a little bit of green here, and then it was concentrated right at that break point. And when this algae died, it actually left a toxin that caused the fish to die. And this is, you can't see it so much here, but there's a little slash of green right here. And we're actually getting reports of this already in the St. Johns River, both in Doctors Lake and in Julian Creek and further areas south. And so we also lead to things like this. We had massive fish kills, and I think we had something like 400 plus fish incidences identified last year. And as those fish died and they decomposed and the algae decomposed, one of the results was with this foam. And this foam is the result of proteins and fats and lipids being whipped up by the wind and then blown ashore. And we had a lot of people call up and worried about this. The foam is not toxic. The foam is not the problem per se, but it's the indicator of the problem. And the problem, frankly, is you and I. We have a tendency to put a little bit of fertilizer in our yards, we put more on there. We've had a tendency to think that the best way to get rid of water was to run it as quick as we could into the river. And so we've got to change that thought pattern. We've got to be able to pay for that kind of thing and to work through it. So I think we've got a lot to learn. We've got a lot to learn. We've done a lot of things right. We've done a lot of things wrong. But we've got to continue to pay attention to it. And so this is one of my favorite phrases that you've heard it before. And Pogo once said, "We have met the enemy and he is us." And this was actually Walt Kelly, who's the artist for Pogo. That was his first Earth Day poster. And so with that thought, I'll leave you. And I think we're going to do questions at the end.